The number 10 has historically been reserved for players with extraordinary talent. The iconic jersey symbolizes you as a soccer genius, but despite lacking in talent compared to those legendary figures, our protagonist Lee Jian found himself wearing this iconic jersey. He wasn't fast, nor did he possess exceptional physical abilities. His skills were mediocre and his mentality was weak. He viewed himself as the least remarkable player on the team. However, he plays hard to remain on the field for those who come and support him, and to be proud of himself. A year ago at the AC Fiorentina U17 team field, all the players were lined up. Jian was feeling nervous, and recently he realized something. Lies are like snowballs. It may start off as a small and insignificant lie, but as you try to cover it up, you end up telling bigger lies, and eventually that small and insignificant lie will spiral out of control. This was the case with him. A day ago, while on the phone with Jiwoo, he lied that around his area he is considered a soccer genius. Jiwoo asked if he had been adjusting well, and Jian declared that he was, and that he even scored 3 goals in their game earlier today. Impressed, she remarked that it seems he is doing great these days. However, this was a lie, and Jian has actually been struggling. He enrolled at Gioventù, a prestigious institution in Italy, but because he was struggling to adjust, he transferred to AC Fiorentina. AC Fiorentina is ranked lower than Gioventù, but he still wasn't skilled enough to make the starting roster. However, he was having a much better time at Fiorentina than he ever did at Gioventù. Jiwoo interrupted his thinking, asking if he was listening to what she was saying. After assuring her that he was listening, he narrates that he and Kim Jiwoo have been friends for 10 years, and she is his one and only friend. When he was in Korea, she always acted like an older sister and took care of him, and although she gets annoying at times, she's a friend he has grown attached to. He felt bad about lying to her, but he didn't want her to view him as a pathetic loser. Jiwoo suddenly announced that she was coming to Italy, causing Jian to spit out the water he was drinking. He became frantic, asking if she really just said she was coming to Italy. Jiwoo confirmed that she was, explaining that she got into a culinary school in Italy, Florence, and while she's there she wanted to come see the self-proclaimed soccer genius Jian in action. She told him that she will be leaving in 2 weeks and expressed how excited she was to see him play. Jian dropped his phone in shock and he started to panic. He wasn't even a substitute player, and he didn't know how he could make the starting lineup in 2 weeks to keep up his lie. In the present, one of the players called out to Jian, asking him to get ready for a mini-game between themselves. He assigned him the second forward position and explained that the coaches are allowing Jian to play however he likes. This was the usual instruction he receives before every practice. He guessed that the coaches say this because they think someone like him, a substitute for the non-main squad, doesn't need clear instructions. Even if by some miracle he escapes the non-main squad and gets called up to the 20-man starting roster, among those 20 only 11 players make it onto the field and the other 9 sit on the bench. In short, if he wants to keep up his lie, then he needs to at least make it into the 18-man roster, excluding the goalkeeper. Normally, he wouldn't care about making the 20-man starting roster, but the thought of Jiwoo viewing him as a pathetic loser was enough motivation. After transferring teams, Jian had a hard time finding the motivation to aim for the starting job, but he really doesn't want to embarrass himself in front of the Hus. If he wants to get out of the non-main squad, then he has to impress the coaches within the next 2 weeks. For now, he decided to push himself in this mini-game. Since he was assigned the second forward position, if he wants to make an impression, then his aim should be goals. The coach blew the whistle, signaling the start of the mini-game. Jian's team started off with quick passes. Because it was a mini-game, the space to move around was limited, and naturally the tempo of the game also sped up. Even without the ball, Jian was thinking ahead. He suddenly sprinted past his defender and called for the ball. His teammate passed the ball, and as he received the ball, Jian could feel a defender behind him. He pretended to turn left, then he faked right with a body feint. He got past the defender, but the defense was quick to get into position. However, with so many eyes on him, Jian knew that there would be an opportunity to pass. He passed the ball to the center forward, and in that moment the defender's eyes instinctively followed the ball's path. And during that moment, Jian sneaked past the final defender, and the center forward passed the ball back to him. Using the blind spot of the defense to shadow the center forward, that is how he plays second forward. Jian kicked the ball, securing 1 goal. His teammates cheered him on, and Jian walked back to the formation, taking a deep breath and thinking to himself that he got lucky the defenders moved how he imagined. But even if it was just by chance, that goal increased his confidence by a bit. He clenched his fist, declaring that he will continue giving it his best. Sometime later, the coach blew his whistle, signaling the end of the second quarter. The score was 6-4, and Jian had scored 2 goals, putting his team in the lead. He planned on keeping up his performance for the third and fourth quarter, but his planning was interrupted by someone calling for him. After getting his attention, the coach, Luca, asked him to take his vest off. Confused, Jian took his vest off, wondering if Coach Luca was asking him to switch teams. After taking his vest off, he sprinted to the other team's formation. He became lost in thought. He was lucky to have good teamwork with the other team, which led to his goal, but he was second-guessing if he could do the same thing on the opposing team. The coach stopped him, asking where he was going. Giant explained that he was going to the opposing team. The coach asked him to just get off the field. This was something Giant wasn't expecting. He thought he was playing a good game, so he wondered why he was being taken out. The next day, Giant was suddenly moved up to the starting lineup, leaving him feeling anxious. When Coach Luca called him out with that terrifying expression, he thought he was going to be kicked off the team. His promotion was so sudden that it felt like his heart was about to fly out of his chest. As he tried to calm himself, his name was called, and Giant stood up robotically, and the head coach, Tony, told him to relax. He apologized for calling him all of the sudden, and he asked him to take the second forward position on the team without a vest. Giant was surprised by the fact that the coaches were already putting him in the starters mini-game, but he accepted. He moved away from the bench to warm up, and the coach looked on, remarking that this should be fine. The previous day, after practice, Coach Luca reported how well Giant played in the non-main squad's mini-game. He didn't know where the sudden motivation came from, but Giant was really pushing himself. He asked Tony if this could be a sign that he is opening his heart to the sport again. Tony commented that it would be great if that was the case. However, he asked Coach Luca not to go overboard and to continue doing what he has been doing. 3 years ago, a single boy's talent left clubs in shambles as they tried to recruit him. Ultimately, the boy, Giant, was taken by Gioventu, but the contract was terminated due to difficulties adapting locally. As soon as the news was made public, Coach Tony quickly contacted Giant. However, he ran into a problem. Even one word of motivation intended to boost Giant's confidence stressed him out. His mentality was in such a horrible state that he couldn't play in a mini-game. Even so, Coach Tony decided to take Giant with him, and he decided to just watch over him until he opened his heart to the sport again. Even though Giant was stuck in this limbo for 2 years, Coach Tony and the other coaches never doubted him, and it seems Giant was finally ready to show the world the extent of his talent. Giant was about to be substituted in place of Gino, and he guessed that Coach Tony was only making a substitution because Gino was having stamina issues. As the minigame went on, Giant started wondering when Coach Tony would make the substitution. However, he felt grateful that they were even thinking about substituting him in. So instead of overthinking, he decided to turn his attention to figuring out what he would do once he is on the field. In his head, Giant visualized the game on a grid. The pressure from the defense was relentless. They even stuck close to the players without the ball. As soon as the ball comes, 2 players instantly surround them. Because of this, the attacks are stuck in turnovers. Giant put himself in that situation. From what he remembers, Gino is a player with a similar play style to his, so if he played how he usually plays, then he was certain that he would be isolated too. He planned on using the field more widely. If he could draw the dedicated marker and lure them to the side or back midfield, then he can create cracks in the defense. However, even Gino, who's a better version of himself, is struggling, so he wondered if it was possible for him to pull it off. This brought on a memory of someone yelling at him to be better. This person declared that mistakes won't be tolerated, and he must succeed no matter what. The memory made him feel nauseous. Coach Tony, who was observing closely, suspected that Giant must still feel an intense sense of burden. There's a rumor that Giant's burden is related to his mother's overbearing nature. What he, as a coach, can offer Giant is to trust him and wait patiently. He approached Giant and told him that he can relax and just play however he feels, even if it's just to give Gino some rest. His goal was to ease the pressure a bit, but it had the opposite effect. Giant confirmed that they brought him up to the main squad to balance the team's stamina, but he did feel better now that the pressure was gone. Coach Tony guessed that something clicked with Giant, and he substituted him for Gino. As he took the field, Giant was deep in thought. G will be arriving next week, and right now his best option is to focus on things he can control and make the most of this opportunity so that he won't embarrass himself in front of her. The whistle was blown, and the frustrating series of passes continued. If he couldn't make a difference after being substituted in, then the coaches will likely keep him on the bench. He entered the field with a plan in mind, but he wasn't certain his plan would work. There's no guarantee that the defender who's marking him will move as he visualized. Giant's marker taunted him, saying he expected some incredible player to be substituted in place of Gino, but they just replaced the best player on the team with some ball boy without a number on his jersey. Giant started imagining Jiwoo calling him a ball boy. He shook his head, trying to erase that image from his mind. Then he shifted his focus on executing his plan. He took off running to the defensive zone, confusing his marker. He questioned if he scared Giant so much that he wanted to retreat to the defensive zone. Giant running in the opposite direction intrigued Coach Tony. He questioned if he was aiming to disrupt the defensive line. Giant succeeded in drawing his marker and creating a gap in the defense. Now he was hoping that one of his teammates would exploit that space. Everyone noticed the gap in the defense created by Giant, and they all dashed to fill the gap. Giant's strategy impressed Coach Tony. His movement created empty space, and his teammates took that opportunity to block the defense from taking that space back. If this chain of movement continues, another gap will inevitably form, and after a series of passes the ball found its way back to Giant. Giant was moving like he could see through the field. He passed the ball and took off running. With him as the catalyst, the stagnant game was starting to flow. Giant was playing like someone with the ability to read the flow of the game, and as he received the next pass, his instinct was screaming at him that if he passes now it will lead to a goal. He passed the ball, and his teammate scored. Coach Tony was smiling ear to ear. If Giant fully awakened, it wouldn't just affect Fiorentina's future, but he can grow into a player who can devour the world of soccer. Sometime later, at the airport, Jiwoo texted Giant that she was departing today, and as she boarded the plane, she exclaimed that she couldn't wait to see the self-proclaimed soccer genius. The next day, Giant was awakened by a dream of Jiwoo, and after getting ready for practice he quickly ran out the door saying goodbye to his father. Practicing with the main squad yesterday left him completely drained, but he managed to get an assist, and he was excited by the thought that maybe that will be enough to get him on the starting roster for this week's game. But when he arrived at the Fiorentina training facility he was met with disappointment. Forget making the starting lineup, the coaches haven't even made his roster change permanent. Instead of being discouraged, Giant decided to shift his focus to something else. He accepted that expecting to make the starting roster just because he stood out a bit in practice was a bit too greedy. The official rosters for the game will be announced before Jiwoo gets here, so even if he doesn't make the starting roster, if he works hard there's a good chance the coaches will substitute him in place of someone at some point during the game. As of right now, the starter for the position he plays is Gino, second string was Andrea Mondi, and he was third string. Giant went through the week practicing as hard as possible, and Coach Luca took notice. He reported to head coach Tony that both in the role of carrying the ball to the final third and finishing as the tactical point, Giant is on par with the starter Gino. He praised Tony, saying that his strategy of leaving Giant alone and letting him open his heart to the sport again was ingenious. Tony chuckled. Then he told Luca that right now Giant is making great strides, however they shouldn't get greedy, and should instead continue focusing on helping him build his confidence. Luca chuckled, saying this situation is like trying to befriend a stray cat, and Tony agreed. After practice, Tony asked everyone to gather. Giant was feeling anxious. This is their last practice before the game, and Jiwoo was arriving tomorrow. Tony praised everyone for the amount of work they put in throughout the week, and he informed them that the roster will be sent out. With this they were dismissed. Giant felt like he did everything he could, so whether his performance in practice was good enough to play was entirely up to the coaches. As he ran home that evening, he found himself for the first time praying to make the starting roster. The next day, Giant was awakened by multiple text messages. It was Jiwoo who was informing him that she had arrived. She asked him to meet in an hour, and instantly Giant ran to his closet. However, everything he owned was sportswear. After convincing himself that this was just a meal with his childhood friend, he decided to put on the sportswear. After getting dressed, he tried running out the door. However, after seeing what he was wearing, his dad called out for him to stop. He helped Giant pick out a better outfit, and sometime later, we see Giant waiting by a lamp post. He checked the time on his phone, wondering if he arrived too early. He starts imagining Jiwoo as the same tomboy as when they were kids. As he imagined this, a voice called out to him. Giant recognized the voice and turned around quickly. Jiwoo was wearing a white dress, and she was hunched over catching her breath. She apologized to Giant for being a little bit late. Giant was rendered speechless after seeing Jiwoo. She approached him asking why he wasn't saying anything. Giant looked away and he tried to skip over what she just said, but she waved her hands in his face and asked why he turned his face away from her. Giant quickly tried to pull himself together, and he shifted the conversation asking why she chose to wear that outfit. She told him that she picked it out because she thought it looked nice. Giant remarked that she never wore skirts when they were kids, and Jiwoo replied saying she wanted to change things up since she was going abroad. Without warning, she grabbed Giant's face asking if he was finally starting to see her as a woman. Jiwoo, being so blunt, was starting to freak Giant out. He pulled his face away saying they should get going. As they walked, Jiwoo pestered him about why he was avoiding eye contact with her. The way Jiwoo was teasing him showed Giant that she hadn't changed much. He shifted his gaze towards her, wondering if she had always been this pretty. At a restaurant, the waiter brought their food. Jiwoo complimented Giant for being able to order all this food. Giant asked her to stop joking around and to just eat. Jiwoo started eating, but Giant was distracted. He turned his attention to his phone and checked if the roster information had been sent out. As she ate, Jiwoo asked how many goals Giant plans on scoring in the game. She says that for a friend he hasn't seen in a while, Giant should promise at least one goal. Giant was surprised, and before he could give her an answer, she asked him if he wasn't the self-proclaimed soccer genius. She suddenly stood up and shouted, "I saw on TV how players celebrate after scoring a goal. She acted out what she saw on TV and asked him if he would celebrate the same way. Jian asked her to quiet down. Right now he doesn't know if he will even make the starting roster, so there's no way he could promise her a goal. But Jiwoo was adamant about the goal. Jian hesitated to promise her a goal, so she sat down asking if that meant he couldn't promise her a goal. She guessed that a goal isn't something you can just promise even if you're a soccer genius. Jian desperately started looking for an excuse. That's when his phone buzzed. It was the text from Coach Tony that he had been waiting for all day. We skip to later that evening, as Jiwoo and Jian were saying their goodbyes. Jiwoo asked if Jian will be able to get home by himself. She proceeded to tease him, saying she could walk him home. Jian asked her to stop making jokes, but she continued, saying it seems Jian is all grown up. As she entered her apartment, she asked him to take care of himself, and as he walked away, she questioned why he was acting so cold towards her. After walking a good distance away, Jian pulled out his phone and checked the text message from Coach Tony. He made the roster, so even if he doesn't get in the game, he could come up with an excuse. But then he remembered that he ended up promising Jiwoo a goal. He started thinking that it might be best if the coaches don't substitute him in. Although it's embarrassing if he stayed on the bench, it's less likely that he will mess things up on the field. He was starting to feel the weight of the lies that continued to pile up. But still, even if he couldn't score a goal, having Jiwoo cheering him on makes him want to play. The morning of the game, Jian woke up extremely early. He guessed that he must be excited because it's game day. The weather in his bed is the same as every other morning, however today feels a bit special. There's no guarantee that he will play in today's game, and even if he does play, it could be the day his lies get exposed. But he found himself happily rolling around in bed with a special feeling about today. Jian found himself imagining Jiwoo and wishing the day would start already. Embarrassed, he quickly cleared his head and he got out of bed and decided to stop overthinking. He got ready and headed downstairs and greeted his dad. His dad was surprised since it was so early in the morning. He told Jian about the sandwich he made, saying he should grab it on his way out. Jian reluctantly stared at the sandwich. His dad's cooking has historically been bad, but it's a sandwich, so he thought it couldn't be that bad. He took a bite and instantly regretted giving his dad the benefit of the doubt. His dad noticed him struggling to swallow the bite he just took, and he asked if the sandwich was bad. Jian lied, saying it's delicious and that he will eat it on the way. He put on his shoes and sprinted out of the door. Sometime later, inside the locker rooms, Jian sat by his locker with his head lowered. His teammates asked him if he was doing all right, and Jian looked up and gave them a nervous thumbs up. The confidence he felt when he left the house was gone, and now he was starting to feel anxious. But this was to be expected. The last time he played in a game was years ago, and since coming to Fiorentina, he hasn't played in a single match. Honestly though, for someone like him, feeling nervous before a match is nothing new. Ever since the adults around him started calling him a genius, Jian has had to live up to their expectations, which made the games feel like a burden. He was having the same feeling now. His heart was racing, partly because it's been so long, but it's mostly because of the thought that he has to succeed. But strangely, something feels slightly different. Back then this burden felt suffocating. But now, as he went through the text message Jiwoo sent wishing him a good game, that burden felt a little easier to carry. Coach Luca announced to the team that it was time to head out, and the team got ready to head out of the tunnel. The message from Jiwoo motivated Jian, and right now all that was on his mind was performing well. As they exited the tunnel, the crowd erupted in cheers, and Jian robotically made his way to the bench. Jiwoo looked on, shouting for Jian to do well because she was watching. Fiorentina started the game with a quick pass to Gino. A defender immediately marked him and started moving towards him. To get past the defender, Gino's shoulder trapped the ball and moved to the left. The defender fell for his reverse movement, and Fiorentina was able to push forward with the opening Gino created. Jian looked on, feeling slightly nervous as the chance of him entering the game dropped. Fiorentina was doing great, the opponent was ranked below them, and the difference in skill was showing. Jian knew his team was good based on their ranking, but seeing his teammates play made him realize that these guys were actually really skilled, and the one who stands out the most is Gino. He is able to exploit the opponent's wide defensive spacing, and although he has missed some shots, his teammates were encouraging him to keep shooting. He had already taken 4 shots, and with how well he was playing, the chances of Jian playing today was dropping. Still, Jian prepared himself for the off chance the coaches decided to sub him in. As he thought that Gino was fouled, Coach Luca pointed out to the referees that that was a blatant elbow hit. The referee gave the player who fouled Gino a yellow card, and Jian got hope that he might actually get to play today. Jiwoo started to get bored. The score was still 0-0, but the others in the crowd were cheering like crazy. She thought back to Jian telling her that he doesn't get to play much because he is the ace of the team, and she started wondering why they were keeping their ace on the bench when the score was still 0-0. The people around her suddenly erupted. Gino had scored a goal. Jiwoo thought to herself that this was bad. The opposing team is ranked below Fiorentina, and now that they scored a goal she wondered if the coaches will ever put Jian in. Jian, however, was ecstatic. A quick opening goal is the best scenario he could imagine. The best way for him to see the field is if Fiorentina takes an early lead. Jian cheered Gino on, but his teammate on the bench with him pointed out that his voice was way too low. At the end of the first half, Fiorentina was up 3-0. Inside the locker room, the benchwarmer praised the starters on how well they were playing. Jian was proud of the fact that his team finished the first half 3-0. The coaches walked in and Jian, whose anticipation was growing, approached the coaches with a plan of what he wanted to say in his head. However, in the face of the coaches, the words wouldn't leave his mouth and he ended up just staring at them. Confused, Tony asked if something was wrong with him. Jian replied, asking if he could use the restroom. Tony gave him permission and Jian disappointedly made his way to the restroom. After finishing his business, Jian stared at the mirror questioning why he embarrassed himself earlier. The scene then shifts as they exited the tunnel for the second half of the game. Jian narrates that normally he wouldn't care about seeing the field, but this was a game he actually wanted to play in. This was largely due to Jiwoo cheering for him. The second half began, and a short time into the match, Coach Tony called out 3 names: Andrea, Fabian, and Jian, and he asked them to start warming up. Jian was taken aback that his name was called. He dashed and stood beside Tony. This made Tony uncomfortable and he asked him to go warm up with the others. Jian was glad that his name was called, but things weren't looking so good. Andrea, who is being trained to be Gino's successor, was also told to warm up. He overheard the others saying that Andrea is a player who handles the ball exceptionally well, and he started wondering what his teammates were saying about him, who's been deadweight for the past few months. 15 minutes later, Coach Luca gave the referee the substitution signal and afterwards he approached Jian. Jian's heart started racing as he anxiously waited for Luca to announce the player who will be substituted in. The crowd noticed Fiorentina making a substitution, but surprisingly, instead of Andrea like they expected, Coach Luca was subbing in number 20. This excited Jiwoo, and she fixed her attention on the game in anticipation of what the soccer genius would do. Jian's vision suddenly went dark, but luckily Coach Luca was able to snap him out of it. He told Jian to relax and to play like he did during practice this week. Jian thought he would feel anxious and nervous, however he wanted to run out on the field. He really wanted to keep the promise he made to Jiwoo, even if that would expose the fact that he isn't the ace of the team. Jian ran onto the field and the game was resumed. A short while after Jian was subbed in, Jiwoo shouted for them to pass the ball to Jian. Her heart felt like it was going to burst. She felt fine until Jian took the field. She wasn't the one playing, but for some reason she felt nervous. Fiorentina started with a 3-way pass that ended with Jian with the ball. From the bench he didn't feel it, but now that he is on the field he can feel firsthand how wild the game was. Simple passes back and forth feel like a ticking time bomb and the opponents seem like predators. Unless you're a true genius, even a moment's distraction will get you devoured. Jian passed the ball to his teammate and he calmed his mind. He thought to himself that the pressure on the field may be wild, but right now he is starving for a goal. He sprinted past the defender, however his teammate, Domenico, was moving into the same area he was aiming for, causing the crowd to wonder if they weren't going to collide with each other. Number 4 on Fiorentina passed the ball, confusing the defense. They couldn't tell if he was passing to Jian or Domenico. Jian and Domenico exchanged looks, and Domenico started acting as a decoy. Jian ran past the defenders, but instead of continuing he heel flicked the ball backwards and changed directions. Coach Luca looked on closely. He explained that the opponent, who normally left gaps between their defense and midfield on purpose, suddenly erased everything and moved to midfield. He fixed his gaze on Jian, anticipating a show. As Jian ran towards the penalty box, 2 defenders tried to box him out, but the space between looked large enough for Jian to get through. He slowed down and scattered his gaze, acting as if he was looking for a passing option. The defenders fell for it. They took a step back to preemptively block the passing route. The goalkeeper shouted at the defenders, snapping them out of it. He reminded them that they were the last line of defense and that there's no way a Fiorentina ace would pass in this situation. However, the defenders realized too late. Jian pulled his leg back, preparing to shoot. Number 4 on the opposing team went low to kick the ball away, but Jian shot the ball in an upwards trajectory. The coaches and his teammates fixed their eyes on the path of the ball and the ball flew directly to the upright. The simulation that Jian had been running in his head for about 80 minutes has become reality, and in the end he was able to keep his promise with Jiwoo. The crowd erupted, and Jian's teammates surrounded him and showered him with praise for his shot. Coach Luca couldn't contain himself. He turned to Coach Tony asking if he saw that amazing play design. Coach Tony asked him to calm down, pointing out that the players on the bench can hear him. Luca quickly calmed himself and Tony looked on proudly. He understood why Luca reacted this way. He thought putting Jian in the game right now was premature, but Luca insisted. It was the first time he had seen Luca argue so strongly for something. He guessed that Luca is fighting so hard for Giant because he understands his situation on a personal level. Coach Tony praised Luca for his hard work. As Giant ran into formation, he realized that he was forgetting something. He remembered that Jiwoo asked him to find her after he scored his first goal. He turned his attention to the stand expecting to have a hard time finding her, but she made herself hard to miss. Giant saluted her, causing everyone in the stands to cringe. After the game, Giant walked Jiwoo home. As they walked, she remarked that it seems Giant wasn't lying. Giant looked at her with a confused look, so she explained that she thought he was just trying to look good in front of her when he called himself a soccer genius. Giant nervously asked why he would lie to look good in front of her. Jiwoo agreed and she started chuckling to herself. Moving on, she asked him if he was going to start in the next match. She pointed out that their next match is against a strong team, and since he is the ace of their team, they should use him from the beginning. Giant was starting to regret saying he was the ace of the team. He just escaped one crisis, but somehow he ended up in another one. Their next opponent is Napoli, a really strong team. He narrates that Napoli is known for pushing up their defensive line to apply pressure across the entire field. As the third-ranked team, Fiorentina must win this game for them to secure a spot in the tournament. It's an important match that they must win in order to play Gioventu for the top spot. In such an important match, the chance of someone like him getting in is near zero. Jiwoo asked how many goals he planned on scoring this game, and Giant replied saying he doesn't know. He explained that goals don't just happen because he wants them to. Jiwoo asked if he was saying he wasn't confident, and Giant, digging himself into a deeper hole, told her that they will see on game day. He thought things would settle if he got through the game, but his lying is spiraling out of control. Jiwoo pokes him in the back of the head saying she is looking forward to it. She did the celebration Giant did after scoring a goal, embarrassing him. Giant walked away announcing that he is leaving, and Jiwoo chased after him and continued to tease him. As they walked, Giant thought about how difficult practice will be this week. However, worrying wouldn't change anything, so he decided to shift his focus on training and making the 11-man starting roster. On Monday, the team didn't do any mini-games and instead focused on recovery. As they went through different stretches, Giant felt embarrassed to work through the recovery stretches for the starters when he only played 15 minutes in the last game. Suddenly, Gino asked for everyone's attention. He announced that he will be leaving. Everyone congratulated him. Giant was confused, but he quickly realized that Gino was joining the 19U team. He observed that everyone has grown attached to Gino, but he wondered if he needs to say goodbye as well. He has never had a proper conversation with Gino, so it felt a bit awkward. Gino suddenly approached him, saying it's a pity they couldn't get to know each other better. He thanked Giant, because if it wasn't for him he wouldn't have gotten this opportunity. He grabbed Giant's shoulder saying they should meet again, but next time on the field. Gino left Giant with multiple questions, but Gino getting promoted was good news. If he could just surpass Andrea, then he will have a chance to be the starter. It seems the heavens were on his side, and if that's the case, he declared that he will give everything he has in this week of practice. As he said this, Andrea made an incredible shot into the goal. Sometime later, Coach Luca reported in Coach Tony's office. It felt bittersweet saying goodbye to someone as skilled as Gino. Tony reminded him that they had no reason to feel bittersweet. Based on skills, Gino deserved to be promoted a long time ago. It would have been nice if they could keep him for a bit longer, but it's time they shifted their focus on someone else. Gino is undoubtedly a talented player, but if you compare his potential to Giant, then he would seem average. Coach Tony expresses that the best option right now is letting Gino advance to a higher class to further develop, while Giant will start building practical experience. Luca agreed, and he expressed that the last game confirmed Giant's high potential, but he was a bit worried. Their next opponent is Napoli, and he is worried that Giant will lose the confidence they have spent so long building in him. Coach Tony states that even if Giant might lose his confidence, selecting him for the starting lineup was inevitable. No matter how tough the opponent, this is still the 17U, and Tony has no doubt that Giant is more talented than anyone in the 17U league. If they are able to bring out his full capabilities by overcoming a team as strong as Napoli, it will give Giant the confidence boost he has been missing. Luca was impressed, and since he had his full attention, Tony asked him to pay attention to how Giant performs. Since Giant hasn't had a chance to actually play a full game, the club might feel there's a lack of solid evidence. This confused Luca, and he asked for an explanation. Tony reminded him that there's little time left before Giant has to renew his contract. Inside a dimly lit room, someone watched Giant's highlights from the last game. This person, the director of the Florence youth team, Paolo Rossini, decided that moving forward he will keep a close eye on Giant. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then watch another one. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.